Hey, and welcome to the latest episode of the PokePopCast. Today we're going to be talking about Blacephalon and tiebreakers. We're going to be talking about Blacephalon GX. We're going to talk about the tiebreakers and the rules, and we're going to also talk a little bit about how those two interact. So actually I want to start off with tiebreakers. We had a release of updates to the rules at the end of October. And the previous release of rule updates in July had the introduction of tiebreakers replacing sudden death. And I'll go into a little more detail on that. But it was a new mechanic. And so the rules were a little, they didn't take into account all possible ways that a match could end. And so we had a period of about 3 months there where things could get a little funky, and luckily it doesn't look like that actually happened at any large events or anywhere that I'm aware of. But they did correct it in this latest update in October, the end of October. So I'll go over what tiebreakers are, how they work, what the problem with the old rule was, what's fixed now. And then we'll talk a little bit about Blacephalon and how that interacts with tiebreakers, and also how it works in general, because I've noticed a lot of questions being asked about that. So we'll try to cover that for everybody. Okay, so let's address tiebreakers first. Okay, so on the update to Play Pokemon TCG rules and formats, that was the original update from July 11th, introduced tiebreakers section 9.1. Now, most players should be familiar with sudden death from the rule book. For those of you who aren't, there's a difference between a tie in a game and a tie in match play. In match play, where you have, it could be single game match or even multiple game, best 2 out of 3 in Swiss, ties are ties in a match. If each player wins 1 game each, and you have an incomplete third game, the match ends in a tie. What's different in a single game tie, and this is not where time is run out in the match and the game is incomplete, so therefore it's a tie. This is the game ended, but it's a tie because both players met the same number of win conditions. Okay, so if you have a single game, or a game within a best 2 out of 3 match, but it's the game, and that is ended in a tie because, say, a Pokemon uses an attack that knocks out the opponent, one of the opponent's Pokemon, but also does some self-damage is a good example. And so both of them get knocked out and both players take their remaining prizes. Now, if both players take their last prize at the same time, and neither player meets another win condition, say one player has bench Pokemon and the other player doesn't have bench Pokemon, then that game, per the old rule book, per the rule book still out there, the general rule book, that game goes to sudden death for resolution. Now, the way sudden death had been played, and the way it's still played if you're not in a tournament, is that players set up for a new game with one prize each, and play that game until there are no prizes remaining. That was problematic with a lot of the mechanics that are available now, where you can, if a Pokemon, if a player just has one prize remaining, there are some cards that do massive amounts of damage, or under the scenario when N was in the format and it's still in the format with expanded, if you play N, you get yourself set up and then you play N and you've brought your opponent down to one card in their hand. And therefore they can't do anything. So it had impact on gameplay that it wasn't really meant to have. So they introduced in July tiebreakers, which was a great thing to introduce. It basically took away the number of prizes being out as an issue or as a thing that had a major impact on the game. So what they stated in the original rule, though, was, to read it here, the winner of the tiebreaker game is the player who takes a prize card first. Now, the issue with that is it only talked about one win condition, taking a prize card. And Pokemon has multiple win conditions. You can win if your opponent has no Pokemon in play. You can win if you deck out your opponent. And there are also some cards now that, like for Circuitry GX, for example, that adds a prize card to your opponent, and that's not count according to this rule as it existed in July. That didn't count as winning the game, even though you now had less prizes because you didn't take a prize. Similarly, the new, and we're going to get into it here. Well, let's discuss it now. Under those conditions, the Blacephalon attack, which had you discard one of your own prize cards, and if it was an energy card, you could attach it to one of your Pokemon. If it wasn't, it was discarded. That would not have counted, right? You'd have discarded a prize card, and you wouldn't have won the game. So luckily, they realized that this was an issue. I think they realized it fairly early, but they did the update here in their October update, and the update that we have, let's go over it here. So first thing is when you do a tiebreaker, instead of setting up with one prize each, you're setting up with the 6 prizes each. I will note it does not say if you're doing a tiebreaker in a limited game that you're set up with 4 prizes each. So I think you'll still, since the rules say set up with 6, I think they're saying go with the rules. So I think in a limited, even if you're playing a 4 prize 40 card deck in a limited thing, if you're doing a tiebreaker, you would set up with 6 prizes for this because that's what the rules here say. I'll check that with them and see if they want to make an adjustment to that in the next release. But as of right now, it's not a huge issue. And the other big thing with the tiebreaker game and sudden death game is it's not decided by who lost the last game gets to choose for this game. It's because this particular game, no one lost. It was a tie, and the game was tied, and so that has to be resolved. So there's a coin flip to determine who's going to go first in either the old sudden death or now in the new tiebreaker games. So the win condition now, and then the notes that it says here, is the winner of the tiebreaker game is the first player who achieves a win condition. And that win condition could be any win condition. It could be, you take your last prize and you have no prizes remaining. It could be you deck out your opponent. It could be you remove your opponent's active Pokemon, your only Pokemon from play, and he doesn't have any Pokemon left. Any of those win conditions work, and it has one additional win condition. In a tiebreaker game, becoming the first person who has fewer prize cards remaining than their opponent counts as a win condition. So that specifically addresses the issue with Circuitry GX, where it adds a prize to your opponent's prizes, and so now therefore you have less prizes than they do, and you win. So that's great. Really glad to see that update. Now, before we move on to Blacephalon, I cannot stress enough that tiebreaker games are not for end-of-match resolution. Okay, one of the confusions I've seen online with a lot of players is they're like, oh great, this is getting rid of tied matches. This has nothing to do with a tied match. This has only to do with a game was finished with time remaining, and with time remaining, that game was inconclusive in that both players met the same number of win conditions. And so a tiebreaker game is played to resolve that game, not the match, just that game. If you go to time and a game is in progress and has not completed, that game still does not count. You don't play a tiebreaker game for that. A tiebreaker game is not played to determine the winner of the match. It is only used to determine the winner of a game where both players had equal numbers of win conditions in that game. Okay? Hopefully that's clear. I've seen a lot of confusion on that issue, so that's what tiebreaker games are all about. Okay, now moving on to Blacephalon GX. It has a couple of interesting attacks that have some mechanics that have confused some people. So let's go through the attacks for this new card. I'll put up a picture, over here. We'll put a picture up over here so people can see the card. And it's the new card from the Lost Thunder set. It has a couple of different versions. You have your full art, your regular art, your full art, and your prism rainbow art. So it's a very popular card. It's going to see a lot of play. So it's important that people know how to use it properly, because otherwise this could be a big mess. So first attack is fairly straightforward. Bursting Burn. 1 fire energy. Your opponent's active Pokemon is now burned and confused. Okay, so two special conditions. You can have 2 special conditions as long as one of the special conditions is tracked with a marker, right? Because confusion, asleep, and paralyzation you're tracking by how you turn the card, so you can only have one of those. But the special condition, the second special condition, is burned, and that's tracked with a burn marker. Just to refresh people, the way burned works changed recently with Sun and Moon. The way it works now is 20 damage is applied immediately when you're in the between turn phase and a Pokemon is burned. 22 damage counters is placed on that Pokemon immediately. Then a coin is flipped. If tails, the Pokemon stays burned, and you have to worry about it during the next turn and between the next turns. If you flip heads, you've still taken the 2 damage counters, because that was done first, but the burn condition is removed. So that's quite a difference from how burn used to be treated. Okay, so that's the first attack. Pretty straightforward. Other than that, it's not doing any damage, but it's a nice, for 1 energy, it's a nice effect. You're definitely getting at least 20 damage from the burn. Second attack, 2 fire energy. Put any amount of fire energy attached to your Pokemon in the Lost Zone. Okay, so now you're choosing fire energy. What's fire energy? Well, you have your basic fire energy, that's one thing. A rainbow energy always counts as fire energy, so you can choose that. It doesn't say, it's not calling out basic fire energy, it's just saying fire energy. You can also choose Beast Energy. Beast Energy is basically a rainbow energy that does extra damage for Ultra Beasts. So that could be chosen to be discarded as well. Now the big question on that attack, and I'll note that they're going into the Lost Zone. So these energy cards are going in the Lost Zone. So they're not going to be retrievable. And then you're doing 50 damage for each card put in the Lost Zone. So the big question that people are having, and I've seen this question literally every day for the past couple of weeks, if you choose Beast Energy, do you get the bonus damage? And the answer to that is yes, you do. And the reason for that is because of the order of operations of determining the results of an attack. So when you do an attack, first you check to see that you have the energy required to do the attack. Second, you make any choices that you're going to make for that attack. Now, in this case, you're choosing what fire energies, or rainbow or beast energy as fire, because they're fire at this point. You're choosing which of those you're going to discard. And I'll talk about counter energy here while I'm at it, because counter energy is basically a double rainbow energy, right? So that could be chosen as fire as well. And you're making those choices. The next step is you do damage. Damage gets done before any effects get done. So even though you've made the choice of what energy you're going to be discarded, you are not discarding the cards yet. You're doing damage first. So then after damage has been done, then the cards get discarded. Now, since the beast energy was still attached at the time damage was done, you get the bonus damage from beast energy. So that's cool. Okay, so the other thing with Mind Blown is that you're and this is where counter energy comes into play. The other thing to note with this is you're choosing to discard the fire energy attached to your Pokemon, not the attacking Pokemon, not your active Pokemon. You can choose it to be coming from any of your Pokemon in play. So one of those Pokemon, if you're behind in prizes, could have counter energy attached to it, and the counter energy would count as 2 fire energy. So you could choose one or both of those fire energy to put into the Lost Zone as well. And this is where it's important to read the attack carefully. It says this attack does 50 damage for each card put into the Lost Zone this way. So it's a bit unusual. You're making the choice of energy, and counter energy has 2 energy, so you can choose one or both of those. But you're actually, when you're doing your damage, you're counting the number of cards that were discarded or going to be discarded rather than the number of energy. So while counter energy counts as 2 fire energy, it is still 1 card, and so will only do 50 damage. So that's an important thing to be aware of there. Finally, we have the GX attack, Burst GX, and that attacks for 1 fire energy. Discard one of your prize cards. If that card is an energy, attach it to one of your Pokemon. So this is an interesting thing. You're gaining a prize. It's either going into your discard, or you may even be getting to put it into play by attaching if it's an energy, attaching it to one of your Pokemon. But it doesn't count as having taken a prize card. So how does this affect things? If you're using an attack that counts how many prize cards you've taken, or if your opponent's playing Blacephalon and you're doing something that counts how many prizes your opponent has taken, this does not count as a taken prize card. Sure, it counts to, if you still get 5 prizes taken and 1 discarded because of Burst GX, you still win the game. But for mechanics and effects that count prize cards taken, this does not count for that. So that's an important detail to be aware of. Okay, there aren't a lot of effects, but it's one of these edge cases where if an effect is looking at did you actually take the prize card, you did not. So that's an interesting thing to be aware of. Judges especially need to be aware of that, because it can have an impact. And as I was talking about originally in the tiebreaker games that we had for 3 months until they fixed it now with this newest release, it actually would not have won the tiebreaker game. So it's pretty cool in that we can call it cool now because it's resolved. It's not a problem, but could have been a major problem, because it is going to be a very much played card, I believe. All right, so that's about it. There was all the other documents, touching back on the rules documents. All the other documents were updated, but there was no real substance to any of the other updates. There's possibly some clarification of some phrases or some updates of wordings, updating what sets were legal in the different formats, but nothing of significance other than that fix and update to the tiebreaker games, and that was a major fix right there, so well worth talking about. All right, thanks for everything we got coming up at the end of this month, the end of November. I'll be down in Roanoke, Virginia for the Virginia Regionals. So if you're down there, say hi to me. Let me know you're watching, and take care.